You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property and their laws. They had no part in making it.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Ansel.
This is episode 288 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. More good news on today's show. So, gonna keep it to good news on today's show as well. I just want to talk about the couple good things going on since it's Christmas Eve. I'll get back to the bad news later in the week. So it might be a little bit of a shorter show, but there are plenty of good things to talk about. I mean, you know, going in, I'm sure most of my audience is from the U.S. Are couple days off work if you're not celebrating the holidays. At the very least, most of us get that. I think we could listen to just some good news and relax and be happy that it looks like some wars here may be starting to come to an end. Of course, you know, we had the announcement about Syria last week, and I had Will Porter on the last episode of the show, number 287, to discuss what that withdrawal could look like and what it could mean and why it's so important. And so I do have some news to add to that. First of all, understanding why Trump made the decision that he did, some early fallout from it, and then just more different reactions and analysis. I've had a chance to listen to and read a lot of analysis on that, and there's so much good stuff coming out from really all corners of the political spectrum where the principal people lie and realize that empire is a bad thing. There's just so much good commentary and analysis on that. So I'll get into a little bit of that on today's show. We have Afghanistan now. Trump is ordering the military to plan to remove, I believe, 7,000, so about half of the U.S. deployment from Afghanistan. And then we also had the resignation of Secretary of Defense James Mad Dog Mattis. And so I'll talk about that a little bit on the end of the show. So yeah, let's talk about some good news. And if, you know, maybe this makes the show a little bit more shareable this time. So think about doing that. foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com. The Libertarian Institute for all my work. You find the show there on the homepage as well as my daily news roundup. And the URL there is libertarianinstitute.org. And last, you know, if you're in the giving spirit as it's Christmas, check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus. All right. So we'll start with serious stuff. And if you haven't listened to episode 287, I recommend it because I don't want to go back over all the details we discussed in that show. But we do have this announcement from Donald Trump that U.S. troops will be leaving Syria. Likely, we have like a 30-day number and then a 60 to 100-day number as far as withdrawal goes. Although, a very great observer of the Syrian civil war, Elijah Magnier, was on Joanne Leone's podcast, and he was expressing skepticism that U.S. troops would ever be leaving. I think a lot of his skepticism was based around the fact that the U.S. has given Turkey a lot of false promises in the past, and it turns out that this whole decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Turkey occurred on a conversation with the Turkish president. So I do think there's reason to be skeptical, but the fact that Donald Trump tweeted it out makes me my feeling on it is that I'm pretty encouraged that this will actually end up happening here. We also have had the announcement that the air war will be included here. And so it looks like to me that this will be the complete conclusion of the Inherent Resolve mission. This is kind of the U.S. war against ISIS. For those of you who don't know, I have a news website, immersionnews.com, and I have all kinds of different war files on there. So maybe I'll be able to close up one for a change with the Inherent Resolve mission maybe coming to an end here. Something that I didn't realize, and I was shocked when I saw it, but Danny Sjursen, he is an Army major about to leave, I believe, retire from the Army and will, you know, now be a civilian in the coming days here. But he wrote an article recently. I think this one was for FPF. I'll link to in the show notes page, where he reminds us that 67 U.S. military personnel have died in this Operation Inherent Resolve. And so, you know, all of these people saying, oh my God, how terrible it is that Donald Trump is bringing them home, and how terrible it must be for the families of the troops whose soldiers are going to be coming home now because of the uncertainty of having Donald Trump as president. We have to remember that, what these men were doing and women were doing, they were dying for over there. And not every time it was, because of an ISIS attack or anything, but all these different accidents and stuff have killed a lot of people. Operating in the Middle East, all these military capacities is extremely dangerous. Even just traveling around between Syria and Iraq. And so, we've seen helicopter crashes. We have seen attacks from different insurgents and ISIS and stuff like that. And so it's a dangerous situation for the U.S. troops out there. It's not, a deployment to Germany or something like that. This is a real combat zone. And that's just, one of the main reasons why it's so great that Donald Trump made this decision is because it improves the lives of thousands of Americans. There's 2,000 men that are going to be coming home. They'll be able to spend more time with their wives and their children, their parents, all their friends and family who really care about them and are worried about them because they're deployed to an active war zone will no longer have to be worried about them, every day, getting blown up or shot or whatever other helicopter crazy crash thing happens. Scott Horton was on the Tom Woods show, and I'll link to this one in the show notes page, discussing this Syria move. He gives, of course, great analysis and so much background detail. But one of the things that I think Scott points out that I don't know if I misrepresented it on the last show, but I certainly don't think my perspective on it was the best. And that is that this move, everybody is labeling it as like shocking and crazy, but in reality, Donald Trump has always said that once ISIS is defeated, that he is going to leave Syria. And so that more or less seems to be what's happened here. And so I guess we really shouldn't all be, that shocked by it. I guess, my surprise comes from the fact that over, the past 6 to 8 months, the U.S., government's kind of mission they're putting out for Syria. And this is, coming from high-ranking State Department officials or, different envoys and stuff like Brett McGurk and James Jeffrey and different State Department and Pentagon spokesmen. This narrative that, went from kind of defeat ISIS to a lasting and enduring defeat of ISIS. And so kind of what I saw this as the U.S. kind of went to war against ISIS. Inherent resolve was against the Islamic State, which was a state. But in the past 6 to 8 months, the state has really changed into an insurgency, right? So it's no longer these, Islamic forces deployed and being like a military wing of a state, but just now the local population's taking up arms against what they see as occupying forces, whether they're U.S. or Kurdish forces. And so now this lasting and enduring feat was changing the U.S. mission in Syria from, the kind of wipe out a state mission to fighting a counterinsurgency. I think when Trump described his, policy of knocking the hell out of ISIS and then coming home, he really meant like taking out the state, but then we are done. We're not going to fight a counterinsurgency in Syria. And so by this standard, I guess like Trump did what he said, more or less. And I'm not trying to take a too favorable look on it or be too favorable to Donald Trump, but hell, the troops are coming home. And that's something that I wasn't expecting to see a couple weeks ago. So, something to be happy about. And as Scott Horton pointed out on Tom Woods' show, I think this is one of those cases where it's important for people when we can to kind of go out and make sure people, especially like our politicians, understand that we support this and that this is a good thing. And so I have some hacky Democrat representatives and senators and stuff like that, but I'm going to give them a call and say, hey, I don't support building the wall, but I sure the hell do support coming home from Syria. So, don't be a never Trump blind hack. Like, look at the situations individually and realize that, yeah, you may see the guy as reckless, but that means that occasionally he's going to do something right. And on those things, you should praise him because he's probably going to do more of them if you do. All right. So I mentioned this a little bit, that the decision was made on a call with Erdogan, who is the president of Turkey. Now, from my understanding, more or less what happens here is that Erdogan gives Trump the Turkish position. And I'm not really on the understanding if he was trying to make it sound like a threat, like, hey, Turkey is coming over that border of Syria, and if U.S. troops are there or not, and I guess they're just going to die. Or if it was more of Erdogan making the argument, hey, look, the U.S. State Department says that this PKK, the Turkish Kurdish militia that we have in Turkey, is a terrorist organization. And you're backing these guys in Syria, the Syrian Kurds, and their militia is the YPG. And guess what? The PKK, Donald Trump, the YPG is just the PKK. I mean, I think if Erdogan was making the argument and wanted to portray it in a dark way, he could kind of portray this whole kind of Syrian, Turkish, and Kurdish operation as something of a cultish following, with, Auckland being the leader. He's now some kind of anarcho-syndicalist or something crazy like that. But, you don't want that running around the Middle East. And, this is like a weird thing where they praise this guy that's locked up in a Turkish jail cell. So, you might not want to support these guys. And so something like that convinces Donald Trump, maybe Donald Trump is able to see the bigger picture here. I talked about in the last show, with these arms sales, and I don't think I took this far enough. And I think Joanne Leon does a pretty good job on her interview with Elijah Magnier, really explaining the whole scope here, where Turkey could have spun off of the NATO alliance and ended up, more in a kind of a alliance axis with Russia and Iran. We see, not only this move and this announcement coming, but understanding that this call was made on Monday, and then I believe on Tuesday we had a State Department announcement that they had cleared $3.5 billion weapon sale of Patriot missiles to Turkey. Makes me think that, there is some credence to give to this look, that it may have been like kind of a big picture argument, realizing that Turkey's position in NATO, especially with, the Incirlik Air Base and some U.S. nuclear warheads being stored there, is more important than the Kurdish problem and the Turkish issue and whatever the hell else is going on in Syria. That's small potatoes there. Big deal here going on though with Europe. And of course, this is also reflected in a story that's been coming out, and I think Mark Perry gets into this in his interview on the Scott Horton Show. And I'll try to link to all these different articles that I'm talking about and podcasts I'm talking about in today's show notes page. And how Mark Perry explains the whole thing is that I think a couple months ago you had the Eurocom general. So, you have like CENTCOM, which is the military organization that does all the military operations in the Middle East. You have, I think, like a Pacific Command for the Pacific region, Southern Command, Central and South America, Europe Command, African Command, Central Command. I think that might be all. There may be one more. Anyways, you have this weird situation because U.S. foreign policy is so terrible and so all over the place, where from the position of Europe Command, we need Turkey as an essential member of NATO because they have the nukes, and them drifting more towards Russia is a problem. And we want to keep Turkey within NATO. We want to be able to sell Turkey U.S. made weapons, so that way they're able to be have the U.S. F-35 in their fleet like all the other countries. They're able to have the same kind of air defense radar systems and all this kind of stuff. And not to mention, it pays well with the potential future employers of, these U.S. generals who end up as CENTCOM or Eurocom commanders, Lockheed Martin and the rest of them. So, you have this whole system that ends up feeding into itself here. But essentially, European Command wants Turkey in NATO, and Central Command is opposed to Turkey because Turkey is looking to attack our U.S. regional allies in Syria. In order for the U.S. to have kind of retained a foothold and as part of our mission creep in Syria, we ended up occupying Syria east of the Euphrates River using a proxy force as our excuse, the Syrian Kurds. And so from Turkey's standpoint, you can't be allies with the Kurds and be allies with the Turks. You gotta pick one or the other. And it looks like Trump, in his call with Erdogan, ended up making the decision to pit Turkey over the Syrian Kurds. Now, it doesn't look like we're going to have a slaughter of the Syrian Kurds, which is good. Turkey and Erdogan have said that they are planning to delay their invasion of Syrian Kurdistan to see what the U.S. withdrawal ends up looking like. A lot of people, I think, are speculating that there's going to be a situation where the Kurds make a deal with Assad and then Assad will take up all the border positions between Syria and Turkey in exchange for the Syrian Kurds coming back under the fold of the Assad government. And I think this move would largely help to end the Syrian civil war, especially then because the Assad guys could turn all of their attention more or less to the small pockets of ISIS and then just the rebels in the Idlib province. And so we could very quickly, I think, here see a huge scale down of tensions and potential fighting in Syria. Although, it could get very messy. Turkey could decide to invade and wage a brutal war against the Syrian Kurds. And you could see mass slaughters there. And then with the Assad army trying to get in, you could see major fighting break out. There's a few names I want to mention. You can either Google these up or just kind of keep an eye out. But there are some people who are doing some great work on debunking all kind of the crappy myths that people are putting out here. I think me and Will Porter did a pretty good job of taking them on the last show. But if you want to see it from other people, the Democratic, there's a few representatives, Ted Leahy, Ro Kahana, and Tulsi Gabbard, who are all doing a pretty good job. To look at the right, you have some commentators, former military like Colonel Douglas McGregor, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, and then Danny Sjursen, who I already talked about on today's show, doing great work on this kind of stuff. So if you're looking for different angles, different perspectives to read to understand why this is a good move, check out any of those sources I recommend. All right, on to Afghanistan. I think that was all I have to say on Syria. It turned out a little bit longer than I thought, but that's typically what happens on this show, huh? All right. Looks like Trump will be asking 7,000 U.S. troops to be withdrawn from Afghanistan. Now, I've seen this reported as half and as 7,000, and I'm not sure which one Trump is ordering. 7,000 would probably be better because it's a concrete number. I think half would probably be over 7,000, though, just because I think there's closer to 15,000 U.S. personnel in there. But if you say half, they're probably going to figure out some workaround by either not including special forces in the total number, so they're going to end up taking half of 12,000 or 10,000 or something like that. One thing I'm interested to read in, maybe somebody like Matthew Ho or Danny Sjursen or Daniel Davis, who have all spent time in Afghanistan, will be able to write something up here. But, what could be done with 7,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan? I guess one concern I have is that the Pentagon will turn to Donald Trump and they'll say we can't take 7,000 troops out of Afghanistan without, risking the fall of the Helmand province. Although that might not be something, Trump may say, let it fall then. Maybe they'll say we don't know if we could hold Kabul. Maybe they'll say if we only have 7,000 troops, all we could do is hold the Bagram Air Base and maybe one or two other bases around Afghanistan, but our troops won't be able to leave the bases anymore. So, that's a concern for that. It's also, depending on, as I'll talk about in a second here with Mattis resigning, who's defense secretary at the time, maybe, they'll be able to talk down Trump into saying then, well, screw it. We'll just go home. It's not even worth it anymore. If we can't have 8,000 troops there because it's too dangerous for them, then we'll have no troops there and that'll just be our solution. We're done with it. So I think this one versus Syria, it's a lot more up in the air if it'll actually end up happening. And again, the eventual replacement of Mattis, I think, will be a very important factor there. I did see that some people were reporting that Donald Trump wanted to, I guess, give the actual order or bring up the order around the State of the Union. So this, late January, early February, I think is typically the time, or maybe late February. Sometime in winter, we usually have the State of the Union address. And so maybe, will give us at least a little bit of a timeline, for what we should be looking for and to know if, this will potentially end up happening. And of course, the best part of this one is that everybody in like the mainstream media, like the Jay Tappers of the world or the Rachel Maddows, are already having a meltdown over, this leaving Syria, which is hilarious to me just because, we're talking about here the U.S. occupation of a Muslim country. We're killing civilians in Syria every single week. We're spending tons of money on it. So you have these people tweeting out with $5 billion for the border wall, we could feed 100,000 starving children for 10 years or something like that. But then you point out that, we're spending billions of dollars in Syria. If we take troops out of there, oh no, the next 9/11 is going to happen if we do that. So it's absolutely insane and stupid how these people act. But these people are literally having meltdown. It's amazing to see. It just makes me laugh. Jay Tapper saying, after Donald Trump just withdrew from Syria, now he may be drawing from Afghanistan. The State Department is going crazy. They just get so crazed about these kind of issues. So I don't know, I guess I'm just saying I'm enjoying Twitter a little bit more the past couple of days. Not only to see that, but of course everybody else, all the normal people in the world mocking them, to just show how far this gone, because I do think it's important to realize this. And because, some people are going to be susceptible to these narratives that the mainstream media is pointing out. That the Washington Post ran an article today saying we just lost the Cold War. Now, the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991 and the Cold War ended. And now apparently because we're withdrawing from Syria somehow, we're losing the Civil War. Never mind that there are still parts of the Soviet Union, the proper Soviet Union proper, that are member states of NATO now. But yet they think we lost the Syrian war because we're drawing from Syria, a country we should have never been in the first place. All right, so the Secretary of Defense here, James Mad Dog Mattis, is resigning. And of course, again, you would think, boy, all these humanitarian interventionist liberals are sure going to be happy that Donald Trump, Mad Dog Mattis, is retiring. But nope, the reaction is, oh my God. And I think it's just so this ingrained. Never Trump. Everything he does is so terrible. We can't even listen to what he's actually saying. Even if he's doing good things, we can't say that, because we just can't get past the fact that, the orange guy is the one saying it. And, I saw one thing I want to point out, one little piece of this that I want to point out is that I saw a lot of people saying this is the first Secretary of Defense to resign, because when he told the president, Mr. President, I can't go, abide by this policy, the president didn't fall in line and say, okay. Every other president in history then has, when their Secretary of Defense said, Mr. President, I understand that you really want to leave this war, but actually we can't do that. Has then said, okay, I understand. Donald Trump apparently is the first one to stand up to the Secretary of Defense, and that somehow, is a bad thing. Maybe we'll get somebody good here. The great thing is that there's been so little mainstream positive reaction to Donald Trump. It's really highlighted a couple people like Rand Paul and Mike Lee, who have given very vocal and supportive support, to Donald Trump. The kind of, things, tweeting it out, going on all these different shows and saying that's a great thing. And, that's probably important for Donald Trump to hear. And so who knows? I'm not saying that Rand Paul's going to end up as Secretary of Defense, but we could get somebody better than James Mattis next time. All right, that's where I'll wrap it up. Hope everybody enjoys their holidays. I have a show ready for Wednesday. It's not going to be a new show. It's a member of the group, a great guy I talked to. He's a foreign policy realist, so check that out on Wednesday. For those of you who want to help the show to grow, let's see, share it on places like Twitter and Facebook. You could do that at foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com or libertarianinstitute.org, patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus, Twitter at KYAAALE. If you're on Minds, check me out there at Immersion News. And of course, Immersion News is the name of my news website. Check out the stuff there. I'll probably be updating over the holidays.